Hey guys, so in this video we'll create a custom React hook that will allow us to persist our state when we reload. So what that means is when we refresh the page, instead of it restarting, it will hold that state that it last had in local storage and keep using it. So what we can see here is the default Vite React starter, and here's our count. I've added an input here for a name field, and whatever I put in here, whenever I hit refresh, our count stays the same and so does the value. So we'll show it one more time. And if we go into the local storage and clear out this value here, so we can see our state here, it gets updated whenever we make changes. If we somehow corrupted this data, say we rename this to just have a 2 in there, and we refresh it, we see that the state gets reset to the default state. So let's get right into it. So what we'll want to do is run npm create vite at latest. We can name this use local storage, and then we'll use the React TS template. So let that run, and then we can cd into our directory we created and run the commands that are suggested there. And then we'll run npm run dev, and then open up a new tab, or you can use VS Code. Open up this project that you have here. I'll be using NeoVim, but any code editor should work. So cd into the directory. We named it use local storage. So we can open it up here. And let's see what this looks like here. So this is the completed one already. We'll go to this one. So yeah, I can see the count. We refresh it, nothing gets persisted. So let's open up the app tsx component. Make it a bit smaller here. And what we'll want to do is let's create an interface for the state that we want to store. So we will just call it state as a generic name. We'll have a name, which will be a string, and we'll have a count, which will be a number. And then here, instead of count and set count, we'll set this to be state and set state. And we'll explicitly say that this is the state type. And then in here, we'll have a default name, empty string, and a count of 0. And let's create 2 callbacks, one for having the score change and one for having the name change. So we'll have a handle score change, and we'll import the callback from React here. This one will take no parameters. We'll call set state, and whatever it was previously, we'll return that, but we'll increment in the count. So we'll do previous dot count plus 1. And in here, we can just pass the set state. And then so over here, we can, instead of saying just count, we need to do state.count. And we will change everything in these curly braces to just be the handle score change function that we created. So if we save this, and if we come back here, it should continue to work. Nice. And what we'll want to do is, let's also add that input for the name. And this is mostly just to demonstrate how you could use this. You would want to use this for your state, your components that you have. So in here we'll have a label. Label, we'll just write name with a colon. We'll do input type text. The value will be state dot name. The on change, we'll create a callback for this in a second. We'll do handle name change, and then we'll close our label. So this on change, handle name change, we should create that as a callback up here. So const handle name change. For this one, the type will be a react.change event handler for an HTML input element. There we go. And we'll also use a callback here, and it'll take an event. And so what we'll do for this one is similar to the score change. We'll set state to the previous. We'll spread out what it was previously, and then we'll change the name. So the name will be the event.target.value. And in here, we can just set the set state as the dependency. We'll save this, and if we come over here, we can see our name input count is there, and now we refresh and everything disappears. So let's implement the functions to make this work. So we'll first define a few helper functions that we need for making the use local storage state work. So what we want to do is write a function that can tell us if some random object is this state interface that we've defined here. So what we'll do for this one is create a function called isState, and it's going to take something which will be unknown, and it will return a boolean that tells us if this thing is of the state type. And so if there is no thing, or if the thing is not an object, so type of thing is not equal to an object, then we can just return false. That whatever that thing is, it's not a state. So we'll write return here. Otherwise, so we can, at this point, to keep TypeScript happy, we'll say maybe thing, and this is going to be of, it's just going to be thing, but as a partial state, because it might have the properties, it might not. So, and then what we'll do here is return if the type of maybe thing dot name is equal to string, and if type of maybe thing dot count is equal to number. So if we have a thing and the thing is an object, and the object has a name that's a string and a count that's a number, then we can be assured that whatever that thing is, it adheres to that state interface we created. And then we'll create a function to read the state. So this we'll call it read state, and it's going to take a state string. So this is the local storage always stores it as a string, so we have to parse it from that string into a object or whatever we want. So this will be a string, and then this function will return something of the type state. And so whenever we work with JSON parse, we'll always want to wrap things in a try-catch, and this is especially valuable or important because what happens a lot of times is you end up changing your state interface, and your component will continue to read it and treat it as that state even though it's not. So this is the reason for all these checks. And so And here we'll want to wrap it in a try catch loop, and we'll have a variable called maybe state, and this will be json.parse of that state string, and then if is state, so this we're going to use that function we just created. If whatever we just parsed is of the correct type, we can just go ahead and return it. Else, what we'll want to do is return a default state value. So we'll create that in a second. And I think it makes the most sense to do it right after we declare the type. So we'll do default state. It's going to be of type state. The name will just be an empty string, and count will be 0. So if we come back to our function here, else we want to return this copy of a default state, and then we'll copy that return statement and then catch. If for some reason there was an error trying to parse it into JSON, we'll just also return the default state. And so now we can implement the hook that we can reuse, which is the useLocalStorageState hook. That's what we'll call it. So useLocalStorageState, and this hook will take a generic, so this will allow us to use it for whatever different state we might want to persist, and it will take 3 parameters. So one is the key. That's going to be whatever we use in the local storage key, a read function, and a default value. And so the key, this will be a string. The read, this will be a function that takes some stringified value. That's going to be a string, and it's going to return something of the type t. That's that generic that we have up here. And then the default value, this will just be of type t. So this is what it starts with if there's nothing to read from local storage. And then so what we'll want to do inside of this function is use React use state. So we'll have a value and set value and use state. And we're going to use a callback for this, not just a value in here, because we only want this to be run once. And what we'll do inside of this is create a variable called const maybe value string, because this may be a value, maybe it's not. We'll read it from local storage dot get item key. That's the value that was passed in. And if there's no value in there, we'll just return the default value. So if there's nothing there, we'll return the default value. Otherwise, if it is there, we'll have again a try catch. This is a bit redundant, but if you forgot to add a try catch in your read function, this would handle it gracefully. What we'll do is call a return read maybe value string. This is calling that function that's supposed to be passed in. And then if some error happened when it was trying to call your function, it will just return the default value. So this whole function that we have here is run. Let me select it correctly. This whole function is run only once, just when the use state is initialized. And what we'll want to do is also create a use the useEffect hook. And this useEffect hook will right away define the dependency array. It'll be run whenever the key changes, which it should never change, and whenever the value changes. So this is whenever we're calling that set state. And what we'll do in here inside of this useEffect is we'll just save it. So we'll do local storage dot set item. The key will be whatever the user passed in, and then the value will just be our stringified value, because it has to be a string when it goes to local storage. And then from our custom hook here, we can just return whatever we got back from that use state, so the value and the set value function. So this will allow us to use the hook the same way we use the use state hook. And we'll just have to add an as const here to make sure that the types are assigned correctly, because the value here is just t, and the set value is the function that we get back from React use state, which is, you can see the type here, React dispatch, with a generic of a few generics within there. And so now all we have to do to get this to work for our state function is, instead of calling use state here, we call use local storage state. And we can keep this state on here, this generic, or we can have it be inferred. So I'll delete it just to show what it looks like when it's inferred. And then let's change everything in this object. So our key, we can have this anything we want. We'll just name it my state with a dash. And then we also need a default value, so we'll just use the default state. And then a read function, which will be that function that we created earlier, read state. And so now if we save this and we go back over here, if we change the count and refresh, we see our count is persisted. We can change this name input box, we'll change the count more, and everything is persisted. And then if we open up the dev tools and go to local storage, and if we corrupted this data, say we change this to score or something, and we reset this here, we see it gets all initialized back to 0, and we can kind of have a fresh slate. It won't break our app if there's some bad data or outdated data. So this function is useful for prototyping. You would obviously want to persist this in a database on the server if you actually wanted to persist it, but this hook can be helpful for doing prototypes, faster, quicker projects, where you're just trying to evaluate some idea and you don't care to persist the data in the back end anywhere. So this is the whole hook. You can put it into its own file, copy and paste it, reuse it in your projects wherever you need.